Hey everyone, listen to this headline out of the CBC under the politics section, which is exactly and precisely where it belongs. MPs to demand government put interests of citizens first after auditors report. Spending watchdog Michael Ferguson frustrated that government hasn't responded to repeated calls for change. And when I read this headline, I got to tell you, first and foremost, I was like, oh shit, impressive. Are we really starting to see some pushback from some of these people in government that are feeling the heat, feeling the pressure, and responding to the fact that you fuckers are forcing way too many debt obligations onto the taxers, onto the tax slaves, onto the taxpayers in this country? So you really need to stop this shit because it's unsustainable. I thought that's what I was going to be reading, but I should have known. It is the CBC after all. That's not the kind of people. It's not the average private sector taxpayer that these people give a flying shit or rat's ass about. No. It's always about protecting their inner circle in reality, right? They spew some rhetoric that sounds good in theory, in principle, but like as per usual, just delve into the rhetoric and the revelations that'll destroy any sense that you might have had that they care about you as an average tax slave in this country. Nah, they don't. Let me read down into it. I'm going to skip through the top part of it. Now, I always post a link to the articles in the description of my video so that you can read the whole thing in its entirety and realize and recognize that, yeah, I'm not trying to misinterpret or misrepresent anything that's being said. But the first few paragraphs is not really, it doesn't really quite get into the meat of the article. So let's get down to the part that I think that's most important. In the reports made public this week, auditors found glaring examples of how government departments failed to understand the scope of the problems Canadians face in getting access to services. For example, auditors found the Canadian Revenue Agency's call center blocked 29 million calls to the helpline and gave out wrong advice to nearly a third of those callers who did manage to get through. So this really does have something to do with genuine taxpayers, but it's just about giving them a better sales pitch, right? Responding to their questions or their inquiries in a much more astute manner, right? So being better salespeople, right? Being better at damage control, being better at public relationship. That's all I'm hearing from this. But the rest of it, listen to this. The government also failed to adequately follow up with the provinces to ensure Syrian refugees had proper access to healthcare and schools. So how's that help a taxpayer, right? These Syrian refugees that the Canadian government, the Liberals, brought to this country, it's the Canadian taxpayers that, for the most part, especially initially, are on the hook and forced to pony up to pay for all this shit. So it's like, wait a minute, how are you really helping Canadian taxpayers by helping Syrian refugees, right, get more access to healthcare and schools? Actually, that's a detriment to Canadian taxpayers in reality, but that's not how they try to present this from the CBC, of course. And the Auditor General said it was clear that the problems with the Phoenix payroll system that has underpaid many public servants, government workers, overpaid some others, and left thousands without a paycheck at all, will cost far more to fix than the government has acknowledged. And I think I remember, I might be a little bit off, but I believe it was roughly around $540 million what the government's suggesting is what it's going to cost to fix this big, gigantic bureaucratic mess and this internal payroll system, this public sector pay type system called Phoenix, right? That somehow it's going to cost $500 million to fix. And that was supposed to be the system to fix the prior system. I mean, like I say, with governments, it's always a make work program, right? Central planners and their subordinates always seem to benefit from fuck ups. But luckily, and fortunately for them, they have taxpayers to soak. But once again, this is a detriment to taxpayers, right? If you're going to spend over $500 million to fix this mess to benefit public sector workers, which once again live off those that are forced to pay into the system, that are forced to pay their salaries, to pay their incomes, once again, that's a detriment to the taxpayer. That's no benefit. Sure, it's a benefit to the public sector or to the government or to bureaucrats, right? But once again, where's this a benefit to taxpayers? It's a fucking detriment. It's the exact opposite. But like I say, the people at the CBC, they don't seem to understand the difference because, well, they are public sector workers themselves. They are a crown corporation. They live and function off of that forced income redistribution model. So to them, everything's a fucking net benefit, right? At the expense of the taxpayer. But how contradictory can you get? He blamed Public Services and Procurement Canada and the Treasury Board for failing to recognize early enough the depth and severity of the Phoenix problem and failed to involve other departments in developing a timely plan to deal with the issue. So, anyways, I'll post a link to this article in the description of the video below. But once again, like CBC, they're so fucking out of touch. Somebody's got to do something at some stage of the game so that I mean, other than myself, because I'm trying, but it just doesn't seem to be getting out there to enough people. But there's a huge glaring divide when you talk about the Canadian population. There's the public sector and the private sector, and they're not even closely aligned. They're actually opposing factions, right? They're actually opposing teams because the public sector are the parasites that are never held to account, that have the ability to confiscate from the private sector to sustain their livelihood, their overbloated salaries, and their gold-plated pensions. Whereas the private sector, they're just, it's at your own device, man. Sink or swim by whatever the fucking means you have in your disposal, which is pretty minimal in comparison to these dipshits that have, big, gigantic government, the big gun in the room, right? The bureaucratic state, mindless enforcers, central bank, gigantic public sector unions. I mean, these fuckers have everything at their disposal to maintain their entitled lifestyles, but the taxpayers, the private sector, you're left to your own devices, and too bad, so sad. But they don't care about you. Even when a headline suggests as such, delving into the meat of the article proves to you that that wasn't their intention all along. But most people, how many people actually read as far down as I do into that article? Nah, they see the headline and they just skip on by for the most part, right? That's why I do what I do, folks. To help educate, inform, and enlighten people properly. It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.